What's up everyone, Alex here. Eternights and CRYMACHINA, two of the year's most anticipated action RPGs, are finally out in the West. And I noticed that a lot of people are comparing both games, with some placing one higher than the other. It's because of this that not only have I decided to break down what each game does well, but I've also gone back and replayed through the entirety of Eternights in preparation for this video. And let's just say that I've eased up on my opinion on said game compared to my review of it. So let's get started. Our first category is going to be talking about combat feel, because when you look at Eternights and CRYMACHINA, both games are trying to basically create a battle engine that is easy to pick up and play regardless of your experience with action RPGs. Because of that, we have to look at things outside of the actual gameplay itself, the things that actually make you feel powerful, ensuring that you really have a good time with the game regardless of how many times you smash enemies left and right. And for this, I feel like CRYMACHINA actually wins this hands down, because while Eternights actually does a lot of really cool things to spice up its gameplay, the impact sounds don't really feel impactful for me. And when you compare that to CRYMACHINA, which actually has some really brilliant visual and sound effects accompanying every single hack and slash, things feel snappy, fast, and very responsive because of the way everything looks. So for me, the winner is CRYMACHINA hands down. I'm gonna just outright say it, but both games' level design with regards to its presentation didn't really wow me. So what we have to take a look then is how every single level is designed with relation to what the games do well, which is its combat. And both games actually just kind of treats their combat arenas pretty much plain Jane. It's like, okay, here's a combat arena, fight. Now, both games also try to introduce mechanics that kind of spice up the gameplay, but both are really inconsequential to the actual combat once again. It's just some side activity that you do when you're out of combat, making you just want to be back into combat, because of course that's the strongest part of both games. So for this category, the winner is actually, well, none, because both games actually need to focus on highlighting the combat and maybe focusing more on helping people improve in combat as opposed to adding in mini games here and there that honestly don't help people get better. Voice acting is going to be an interesting conversation because Eternights has English voice acting and CRYMACHINA doesn't. CRYMACHINA only has Japanese voice acting. The way I'm approaching this is how well the voice acting actually adds to the overall experience. And to be quite honest, my experience with CRYMACHINA's voice acting is that it actually affected the pace of the game so much that it ultimately slowed the pacing of the game for me. And the unfortunate side effect of this is that sometimes the voice acting in CRYMACHINA actually ends before or after the text scroll that happens on screen. And as I've said in my review of that game, I prefer it if both kind of finish very close to one another. With Eternights having English voice acting, this makes it easy for anyone who is a parent or have responsibilities at home to be able to walk away from the game and still be able to understand what's actually happening on screen without having to look at it. And this would have actually benefited CRYMACHINA immensely because of the ridiculous amount of dialogue in that game. So for this particular category, Eternights wins for me hands down. Rolling into pacing, CRYMACHINA has a problem of over-delivering with its story, whether it's a backstory of a character or just some trivial stuff that provides a little bit of flavor to what's going on in the world. Unfortunately, this is very excessive at the very beginning, making CRYMACHINA fall into a trap that so many other JRPGs fall under, where they have to offload so much at the beginning and leave very little else a few hours later. And when you compare this to Eternights' story pace actually moves forward at a pretty good clip. Not once did I ever feel like my journey through Eternights was boring, or it's somehow hampered by something that I feel like I had to watch. Every single moment in Eternights felt really good actually, ensuring that players are thrust into the action with very little delay. So for this particular category, Eternights wins for me. So both Eternights and CRYMACHINA are doing very different things with regards to its progression system. Eternights relies a lot on its social link type system in order for you to actually enhance your character, which is a really good idea on paper, but it's also overly convoluted because it pads the length of your gameplay. And as I mentioned in my review of the game, the reason why social links work in Persona is because it's something that you can spread across an entire calendar year or 100-hour gameplay. Whereas in something like CRYMACHINA, they actually opted for a more traditional kind of system and putting a little bit of a spin on it. So you basically have these armor pieces that you can graft different offensive and defensive capabilities onto, and they can branch as well, meaning depending on the circumstances, different abilities may trigger, giving you access to even more abilities. And there's also a really fun upgrade system with CRYMACHINA that makes it feel very rewarding to engage in, making you feel as though the kinds of upgrades that you're giving your characters are very meaningful to the type of gameplay that you like to set up in these styles of games. So for this category, CRYMACHINA wins for me. When it comes to the story, I do find that both games are pretty even when it comes to like the sci-fi aspect of it, but I think Eternights wins for me because of the attention to detail when it comes to the characters. And as much as I didn't like the social link system tied to the game's progression, Eternights characters are really likable, regardless of their current disposition. There's also something to be said about the pacing affecting the storytelling, with Eternights really focusing on getting the player back into the action as much as it can, while still pushing the story forward. And while there isn't a lot of meaningful progression that happens in the story that often, I think Eternights' story is ultimately more interesting because of the ongoing mystery, whereas in CRYMACHINA, it feels like a pretty straightforward narrative. So for this category, Eternights wins for me. While there may be some really neat musical tracks that can be found in Eternights, I just absolutely love CRYMACHINA's soundtrack. It's a kind of soundtrack that makes you really want to get in there and engage in the combat as much as you can, while also doing a lot of heavy lifting for providing the necessary ambiance in order to enjoy the actual gameplay experience. There are times in Eternights that I felt like they needed music with more oomph, and CRYMACHINA's electronica soundtrack really provides that extra flavor that actually helps round everything together, making an experience that is really immersive. So for music, I absolutely love CRYMACHINA's soundtrack, which makes it an easy win for that game. As you can tell, both Eternights and CRYMACHINA excel in several areas that the other doesn't. But as with most things, your choice of which game to pick up is up to you, depending on what you're looking for. That said, if you played both games, I want you to share which one won in your book in each of the categories I mentioned. Post your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. And if you need a deeper analysis of each game, I've linked both of my reviews in the card shown, which will give you more expanded information as to what each game does well. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.